Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we are discussing the future of the monarchy. Now, Ben, you and I, we probably disagree on our views on the monarchy. I have my own personal views. They're not representative of the organization I work for, but you might call me maybe a small R Republican, not so passionate that I'd call myself an abolitionist, but I don't really see a whole lot of value in a constitutional monarchy. Now, I don't want anyone to interpret this on a comment on the Queen personally. I don't know her, but she seemed like a nice person and she performed her role with a lot of dignity. But that doesn't make me personally see value in the role itself. So, Ben, give me your best sales pitch on why Canada should have a monarchy. And let's put aside for a minute the challenges of getting rid of it. What is the value in it as an institution?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of arguments you can make for keeping the monarchy. Some of them, I think, I happen to think that kind of the culture and the tradition that the monarchy represents, the kind of continuity of it, is important. But I actually think the strong argument for the monarchy, and one that I think doesn't require you to become, some sort of ultra monarchist or some royal watcher to actually embrace, is precisely that having this formal head of state, that has this sovereign, right, that wields this immense power that they're actually not able to wield. I actually think it's a very kind of accidentally, it's a very important check on power, precisely because as we've been discussing in earlier on, it's a symbolic role, right? There's a lot of symbolism that goes into the role. Well, depriving our actual, the real person that's in charge, obviously, is the prime minister in many practical ways. Depriving the prime minister of the kind of symbolic power of a head of state in the way that, say, a kind of an elected president has, like an American president, for example, I actually think is an important check on their power, because it denies the person actually wielding the power to kind of claim a kind of symbolic representation of the nation. Right now, we might think it's a bit silly, but the monarchy is supposed to be, the sovereignty resides in them formally, and also in some ways they are the kind of symbolic personification of the nation. So I think separating these two roles out, having a head of government separate from a head of state, and having a head of state that has this immense power that they actually cannot wield and that we expect them not to wield, is actually, I think, a very important small L liberal check on power. So I perhaps counterintuitively think the system we've developed is probably. It's not a coincidence, right, that some of the freest and some of the most stable and peaceful countries in the world have constitutional monarchies. Of course, that's not the only reason, of course, that they are free and stable countries. But I think the system, there's the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think there's pretty good arguments to think that the system actually functions pretty well, and there's actually good reasons to think it's a check on power as opposed to some, an aggrandizement of power that some may think it is.
David, I want to give you a chance to respond to any of that. What's your view on whether or not we should have a monarchy, setting aside the challenges of actually getting rid of it?
Well, it seems to be an archaic and decaying institution, inappropriate for a modern multicultural democracy. As Ben said, if we were beginning from scratch, we wouldn't want a system like this, but it seems to me that we could envisage changing the system, even though we needn't begin from scratch, that there are some functions performed by the Canadian head of state, that is now the king acting through his representative, the Governor General, that we would need to think about transferring to another institution or person who could serve those functions, having to do, for instance, with dissolution of Parliament or prorogation of Parliament, summoning the Prime Minister to organize a government. And so we could envisage doing that, as have other states, or we could write it down in some detail. It seems to me there's nothing standing in the way of codifying many of the customs that we've developed over time. So it seems to me that the Crown really has no power. It's not like it's holding it in reserve. It has no power. There would be a constitutional crisis if the British monarch or his representative interfered in Canadian affairs outside of those few little moments, right, when discretion can be exercised by the Crown. So it seems to me that we could pretty easily do away with it, replace it with something else.